All right, let's dive right in. We are going to look at how you can use your own hands and some real tools to transform any raw, messy space into a beautiful floor. We're going to break down those walls of intimidation today and give you the foundational knowledge you really need to tackle a major home improvement project entirely yourself. Picture this. You're staring at a dirt patch full of tree roots in your backyard, or maybe a sticky, paint-splattered subfloor inside your house. Believe it or not, these projects actually share the exact same DNA. Whether you're building an outdoor floating deck, installing locking laminate, or laying down beautiful solid hardwood, they all follow a surprisingly similar rhythm. Here is our blueprint for this explainer. Phase 1, planning your perfect project. Phase 2, prepping your base. Phase 3, mastering the installation. And finally, Phase 4, adding the finishing touches. Kicking things off with Phase 1, planning your perfect project. Look, planning is literally your project's roadmap. Honestly, nerding out with a 3D model or just some good old graph paper ahead of time is the absolute best way to visualize your cuts and stagger your seams. You've got to measure the length times the width of the room and, this is absolutely crucial, add an extra 10%. That covers waste, warped boards, or, the inevitable mistakes, so you guarantee you have enough material. Plus, mapping it all out means you can adjust your starting row so you don't end up with ridiculously tiny, narrow strips of wood against your final wall. Now, if we step outside to build a floating deck, planning looks a little different. A floating deck just means it isn't actually attached to your house. So if you're keeping it under 200 square feet, your planning phase involves checking local codes, mapping out a nice 14 by 14 area safely away from your property lines, grabbing your pressure-treated lumber and zinc-coated hardware, and, best of all, completely bypassing the absolute nightmare of digging a deep foundation below the frost line. Okay, let's talk about the 3-4-5 method. Once you've got your string lines set up for your deck spatter boards, you just measure 3 feet down one side, 4 feet down the adjacent side, and check the diagonal between those 2 points. If it is exactly 5 feet, boom, you've got a perfect 90-degree angle. It's basically construction magic that guarantees your base is perfectly square before you ever touch a piece of wood. Moving right along to Phase 2, prep in your base. I know. This is the tedious, behind-the-scenes stuff, but it literally determines if your floor is going to last a lifetime. Before laying a single board, you have to handle the dirty work. Inside, that means painting the walls while the room is totally empty, pulling up those nasty old tack strips, and rescuing all the missing socks you thought the elves hid under your dryer. Taking it outside, you absolutely have to call 811 to check for underground utilities before you dig. And if you're installing solid hardwood, it means bringing those boxes inside, opening them up, and letting the wood breathe. It needs to acclimate to your home's exact temperature and humidity for at least 72 hours. So the make or break point for an indoor install is a structurally sound base. First, you've got to clean it. Remove all the old adhesives, the wax, the dust. Next up, you have to test the subfloor for moisture using a pin meter. Trust me, trapping moisture under your brand new floor is a total recipe for disaster. And finally, leveling. The floor shouldn't vary by more than 3/16 of an inch over a 10-foot span. If it does, you've got to sand down the high spots or fill in the lows with leveling compound. Because at the end of the day, every good floor needs a base that's tailored specifically to it. Take a look at this. A floating deck uses shallow trenches filled with landscape fabric, paver base, and concrete deck blocks. Meanwhile, putting laminate over concrete means you absolutely need a moisture barrier underlayment with the seams taped up tight. And solid hardwood, that gets a nice layer of 15-pound felt paper or grade D craft paper overlapped by 6 inches. All right, on to Phase 3, mastering the installation. With the messy prep finally out of the way, we arrive at the really satisfying rhythmic climax, the actual installation. But hold on. Before you drop that first board, you must leave an expansion gap. We use wedge spacers against the wall to leave a 1/4-inch gap for floating laminate or vinyl and a 3/4-inch gap for solid hardwood. Why does this even matter? Well, temperatures and humidity fluctuate, right? If you don't give the wood that little bit of breathing room at the edges, the pressure just builds, and your gorgeous new floor will literally buckle and pop up right in the middle of the room. Now let's talk cutting. Sure, you can easily score and snap a vinyl plank for a quick, short crosscut, but whatever you do, do not make the harsh rookie mistake of manually scoring a long, lengthwise plank with a utility knife and then beating it with a mallet. It's just going to snap into a jagged, awful mess. Do it like a pro instead. Fire up a circular saw, a table saw, or a jigsaw to cleanly rip those longer boards down to the perfect width. If you're taking on solid hardwood, you're going to use a really cool technique called blind nailing. Here's how it works. After you face nail your starting rows right up near the wall, you switch over to blind nailing. You grab a pneumatic flooring nailer, give it a solid hit with a mallet, and it drives the fastener at a perfect 45-degree angle straight through the tongue of the hardwood plank. So when you slide the groove of the very next board right over it, the nail completely disappears, keeping your entire surface looking absolutely pristine. Okay, let's hit some rapid-fire pro tips straight from the trenches. First, get yourself an oscillating flush cut tool to smoothly slice the bottom of your door jambs. That way your planks can slide right underneath for a truly flawless finish. Next, make sure to mix boards from different boxes and always stagger your flooring joints by at least 6 inches. You really want to avoid those weird, unnatural brick-like H joints to keep everything structurally sound. And lastly, for the outdoor builders, slap some waterproof tape over the top of your deck joists before laying down the composite decking. That simple step seals the wood and stops ice and water from causing nasty rot later on. And finally, phase 4, adding the finishing touches. This entire phase is basically about beautifully covering up all those necessary expansion gaps we talked about earlier. For example, let's say your newly installed laminate needs to meet up with some existing bathroom tile. If they happen to sit at the exact same height, a T-mold transition is your absolute best friend here. You just screw a metal channel right into the subfloor in the gap between the two floors, and then firmly tap the T-mold transition right into the track with a non-marring mallet. The very last step is hiding all your remaining rough edges to get that professional aesthetic. Inside the house, if you didn't remove your baseboards, just grab a pin nailer and cap off those expansion gaps with some quarter-round molding. Just be super careful to nail into the baseboard itself, not down into the floating floor. And outdoors, you're just going to take some composite screws and attach sleek fascia boards right to the outside of your deck. It completely hides all that rough, pressure-treated structural framing. You know, ultimately, getting your hands dirty and building some sweat equity is just an incredibly valuable skill that absolutely anyone can pick up. Getting down in the trenches, figuring out how to problem solve a really tough cut, and then standing back to see an entire room or backyard totally transformed because of your own hard work, there is literally no feeling quite like it. So now that you've got the blueprint to demystify these totally doable projects, from perfectly squaring up a deck foundation to blindly nailing solid hardwood, what space in your home are you going to tackle next? Go grab that tape measure, sketch out a layout, and let's get building. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.